Time now for our look-ahead focus on Kings of the North. It is the Pac-12 Championship game. It's on Friday night. If you are a person who is like kind of new to this show and maybe hadn't thought about Northern football the same way, and it's like, I'm just really like a Notre Dame fan or a Penn State fan or a Michigan fan or whatever, but I guess Doug and Bill are trying to get me to care about watch. It's Friday night. Don't wait. Be like, I guess no, I am excited for that. It's pretty good. Oh, Saturday morning. When's that game on today? It's on Friday night, 8 p.m. on ABC. Set a timer on your phone because this should be really good. But I'm a little surprised, Landis. It's like a 9.5, 10-point line, and I think it's just because everybody thinks the wrong team won the first time. So Washington won this head-to-head battle like 6 weeks ago. Since then, they've each played 6 games. Washington has won its 6 games since beating Oregon by a total of 39 points. They've won by 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Oregon has won its 6 games by a total of 156 points.
Mm-hmm.
They've won by 9, 14, 24, 29, 36, and 44. And 5 of those 6 opponents are the same.
Yes.
Landis.
Yeah.
Kind of weird.
Yeah. I did the same math that you did. I didn't total them, I just averaged them. So it's 32-25 for Washington is the average score, and 42-16 is the average score for Oregon. Drastically different. The two teams I think have gone in opposite directions, I think, very clearly since that game was played. I don't know that I came away from the first matchup thinking that the wrong team won, right? I just thought it was like a competitive game. Oregon played it. Both teams actually played it fairly aggressively. And Oregon played it ultra aggressively at the end of the game and kind of didn't live to tell about it. And that was sort of the way the game went, but it was a little back and forth. Washington's offense stalled out a little bit in the second half, and Oregon kind of took over and stole some momentum and couldn't quite finish it off. But I didn't think like, Oregon whipped Washington up and down the field. I can't believe they lost that game. But the way they played since then, I totally understand why this is more than a touchdown spread.
So both these teams are excellent offensively. They are just up there among the best offensive teams in the country. By the FEI offensive rating, Oregon is 2nd and Washington is 5th. Looking at success rate, running the ball, Oregon's 2nd, Washington's 4th. Passing the ball, Oregon's 1st, Washington's 6th. They both just really are tremendous offenses. I think Oregon's probably a little more balanced, although Dylan Johnson's been running the ball well for Washington as of late. Bucky Irving, the Oregon running back, we've talked about him all year. He is, as a dual threat, just an incredible player. Do you think either offense has like a clear advantage here, Landis? And we've talked about it a lot. Bo Nix just throws shorter passes. Michael Penix throws longer passes. And that's just stylistic with the way the games are called and the way the offenses work more than anything else. Do you think one is definitively better than the other right now?
I think Oregon's is better right now. It's the balance. It's my belief that Oregon, I think, can win a couple of different styles of game depending on how things go. I don't know that Washington can. I know they've run the ball okay. I'm actually surprised their rushing success rate is so good and it's the USC game for Washington skews it, right? Because they ran the ball over USC. But I wanted to look it up like before we started talking about this game, because in my mind I was thinking like Washington is almost a different offense now. They're running it more effectively. It's not actually the case. In the 5 games before they played Oregon, Washington was averaging 26 carries per game for 123 yards. And in the 6 games since it's played Oregon, Washington is 28 carries for 126 yards. So it's like 2 more carries and 3 more yards per game. It's not really a gigantic difference there from how they were running the ball in the beginning of the year. So I just think Oregon is a more reliable rushing attack. And while the passing attacks are different, I still think like Oregon does a lot of short stuff, but they can get you downfield. And Washington's got some injury stuff too, right? They've not really had their full complement of receivers for the entire year. Like Rome Odunze's been there and he's been a stud. Jalen Polk, the last 2 games, doesn't have a catch. He's got 10 targets and no receptions. And Jalen McMillan's like been in and out of the lineup all year, and he finally did get on the board with some receptions in the Apple Cup last week. But prior to that, he hadn't had one since September 16th, when he was like in and out of games and not playing a whole lot. So like Michael Penix has kind of had to do it with sort of only Roma Dunze at times. Meanwhile, Bo Nix has kind of had his full complement of weapons available to him, and others have emerged here in the back half of the year as well. So I just think Oregon's better positioned.
It does feel a little bit like to me with Washington's health. And again, Jalen McMillan has played he's played like 30 snaps each of the last 2 weeks. It's similar, I think, to like what Ohio State went through with Emeka Buka of like he's hurt, and then we want to get him back and get him on the field because we want him to hopefully be at his best when it really matters. For Ohio State, that was the Michigan game. For Washington, it's this game.
Mm-hmm.
So if like there's a part of me that wonders, I mean, now it's not like a strategy because like they almost lost. This is not, they beat Oregon State 22-20. They had to get they didn't score an offensive touchdown against Arizona State. This has not just been like, okay, they're playing it close to the vest. This has been like, is Washington going to lose? Like, I think everybody in college football, like 4 times in the last month and a half, you've looked at a score of a Washington and been like, oh, today's the day.
Mm-hmm.
And then they've survived. So it's not a plan. But there's a part of me that wonders, like, if they just kind of knew they had some injuries and they sort of entered, like, maybe defenses are figuring us out. Maybe we're a little injured. We're in survival mode, and then we'll get back to being ourselves on Friday night against Oregon. But also maybe that's a bunch of excuse making for a team that hasn't looked that good.
Yeah, I think that's right. One other thing to consider with Washington, like they've done an interesting thing here with Giles Jackson, their receiver who was at Michigan earlier in his career, and I think he got hurt. I think he got hurt and missed time, and then it got to the point where they like tried to finesse it and see if they could redshirt him and preserve this year of eligibility while still have him available to play. So he has not played the last couple of weeks. Or he didn't play last week again in the Apple Cup, so he's only appeared in 4 games. But now he can play, and it won't impact his eligibility moving forward. It's like a new rule change in college football. Postseason play, which includes conference championship weekend, does not actually count towards your eligibility if you're trying to redshirt. So like they'll have him available, and maybe that adds a little something. You know, he's not a super productive player, but he's pretty dynamic, and maybe there's stuff for him that they haven't shown a whole lot of that they can get to in this game against Oregon. So it's not like the cupboard's completely bare. For Washington, it's just that if you compare like the health of the two offenses and like available weapons, I think Oregon comes out looking much better coming into this game.
Defensively, it feels like the difference here is that Washington does not stop the run very effectively. And that like Washington's okay against the pass. Oregon's like a better defense, but it's specifically that when it comes to rushing defense, that's the biggest, I think, difference between these two teams. And so that, like, could that be it? That this is sort of Bo Nix's Heisman showcase for Oregon, but might it wind up being Landis that Oregon like tries to run the ball down Washington's throat? Yeah,
I could see it. Although Oregon didn't run it a ton, I don't think, on Washington when they played the first time, did they? I can't remember exactly what it was, but yes, that is something that I guess worries me a little bit in this game. Is I just kind of think Oregon might be able to control Washington in the trenches. Like if it gets into a drop back pass game, then you get like Braylon Trace out there who's been playing like a maniac the last few weeks, and maybe he becomes a disruptive force in this game for Washington. But if Oregon is able to just sort of like run its offense and like be on schedule and run the ball whenever it wants to, or whatever it makes sense to, then I do think that's an advantage here, because the pass defenses on both sides are pretty good. I also I tend to think that doesn't matter a whole lot when you're playing offenses like this. I think both teams are going to be able to throw the ball quite well and probably do mostly what they want to do that way. And then that makes me think like the ability to run the ball become a little bit of an X factor in this game. And I trust Oregon's ability to do that against Washington's defense than I do Washington's against Oregon's defense.
First game, Oregon ran it 40 times for 204 yards, 5.1 yard average.
Okay,
Bucky Irving, 22 for 127. Jordan James, 11 for 63. And they have been like a pretty good 1-2 punch here for Oregon. So again, that like the first game, Nix and Penix both threw for 300 plus. Oregon ran for 200. Washington only ran for 100, but like Oregon didn't win. Like Washington found a way to win. Jalen McMillan, again, as we talked about, did not play in the first Oregon game. So again, if Washington can get back to sort of like full health. I mean, in the end, by the FEI ratings, Oregon's defense is 15th. Washington's is 33rd. So we see, I think, that defensive advantage in one area for Oregon. Or we're saying like, oh, it might just be is it like best quarterback wins? Because Nix and Penix are both in the thick of the Heisman race. Nix more so than Penix, but I do think the winning, I don't think the losing team's quarterback can win the Heisman. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. Yep.
And I think the winning team's quarterback potentially has a very good chance to win the Heisman.
I think if it's Bo Nix, he's going to win the Heisman. I think Michael Penix could still have more of an uphill statistical battle against like Jaden Daniels.
Yeah.
And perhaps even Bo Nix. Like if they both ball out in this game, like I think Bo Nix could still finish ahead of Michael Penix.
Bo Nix is minus 165 in the Heisman odds. Penix is about 16-1 in the middle of the season. Penix was the favorite for a while there. He was at minus odds. Again, Nix just a much higher completion percentage because of this type of offense they run. Both of basically, they're within 7 yards of each other. 39.06 for Nix, 38.99 for Penix. That Nix has only thrown 2 picks is pretty remarkable because he has been attacking down the field at times. We saw the throw right before the end of the half against Oregon State last week to Troy Franklin, where he's going to make a play and they get an extra touchdown that they probably shouldn't have gotten, and then they're off to the races against Oregon State. Like 37-2 is a ridiculous touchdown to interception ratio, even if you're only having an average depth of target of like 7 yards. And Penix has thrown 8 picks, Landis. So
yeah.
I still think Michael Penix is great, but Bo Nix has been a machine for, I think, since that loss. He's been like locked in.
Yeah, that's the point I wanted to make earlier when we were talking about the finalists for the King of the North. Since that game, Bo Nix, 78% completion rate, over 2,000 yards passing, almost 11 yards per attempt, 20 touchdowns, 1 interception, 25 total touchdowns. Michael Penix, 59% completions, 1,500 yards, almost 1,600 yards, 7.5 yards per attempt. So it's like almost 4 yards per attempt worse than Bo Nix. Only 12 touchdowns compared to Bo Nix's 20, 3 picks compared to Bo Nix's 1, and 15 total touchdowns compared to Bo Nix's 25. So, like, yeah, Bo Nix has been on a rocket ship since that game, and Michael Penix has come back to earth a little bit.
Yeah. There's no doubt that Oregon has played better than Washington since they played. To me, that's not a guarantee that Oregon will play better on Friday night. I still think it's possible that there is a best version of Washington that has been in hibernation a little bit. And we haven't mentioned the 2 coaches in this game. And I'm not going to say it because I don't want us to talk this way. So we're laying out what Kings of the North is all about. I don't want to say something like Dan Lanning has Oregon playing like a Southern team, because that's not the point, right? But like, Oregon is very aggressive. They get after it. I talked so much in the beginning of the year, it felt like Washington's offense was just like on the attack, relentless, an assault almost, right? Like, they don't let you breathe. And it's like the last 6 weeks, it feels like Oregon on both sides of the ball has been like that. Like, Dan Lanning is just a very aggressive, kind of in your face kind of coach, and Oregon is playing that way. So they are reflecting their coach. And it's not as much of a trend lately, but there was a time when second-year coaches were winning national titles like crazy, man, right? Like Urban Meyer at Florida was a second year. Les Miles at LSU was a second year. Jim Tressel at Ohio State was a second year. That was a thing of like, hey, inherit a program that actually has some talent and then be the coach that gets them over the top. Like, Dan Lanning might be on this path because like Oregon is getting after it. And it feels more like Kalen DeBoer at Washington, a lot of similarities, but I think Kalen DeBoer to me is more like sort of holding his team together and finding ways to win when they're not at their best. That like Lanning is like leading the attack and DeBoer is like managing the issues. And even the play they ran at the end of the Apple Cup on a 4th down little like option flip to Rome Odunze, that was like, holy moly, like in a big time game to win, like that's what you're doing. Kalen DeBoer has managed to hold it together, where it would have been very easy for Washington to have taken a loss, and they haven't. But credit to both these guys for getting it done.
Yeah, I think both are strong candidates for National Coach of the Year, right? maybe this game might decide who wins that ultimately. They both done a tremendous job in different ways, but I think both have been effective and impressive. And you're right, it's that I also don't want to speak about Dan Lanning in those terms of like bringing the South to Oregon, but I think would be being disingenuous if we didn't acknowledge there was an element of that, both in their style of play and the way he builds that roster, and it's worked for Oregon, and I think it will continue to work for Oregon. How do you think 0 for 3 on 4th down in that game, including at the end giving Washington a chance to win the game, and also at the end of the first half not taking a field goal that obviously would have been important for Oregon? How do you think that might influence Dan Lanning's decision making in this game?
I think he doubles down.
Yeah.
I think he thinks to himself, I'm going to keep doing what I do. It didn't work the first time, which means it will work the second time. What do you think?
I think you're right, because I think Dan Lanning is among many things, he's aware of the conversation around that too, right? And I think he'll want to probably prove himself right in the long run by doing that. It is interesting to me. I was just checking this as you were talking, and now like game state matters here. I'm not pretending like it's apples to apples. Through the Washington game, Oregon went for it on 4th down 13 times in 6 games. In the 6 games since, it's gone for it on 4th down only 8 times. So, but it did go for it on 4th down 4 times against Arizona State. So,
yeah,
maybe it's who they are.
It's a great position for these two programs to be in. Kalen DeBoer is 23-2 in his 2 years at Washington. Dan Lanning is 21-4 in his 2 years at Oregon, and they are both coming to the Big Ten next year. So they won't be coming with their quarterbacks, but they're going to be coming with like real programs. This is not. We agree on that. This is not like, hey, they got some good quarterbacks in the portal and, peaked, and now they're going to fall back to earth. Like, do you think both these programs, both these head coaches are like building something, even if there might be a little bit of a step back if they have to replace Bo Nix and Michael Penix? But how real do you think this is going to be for Oregon and Washington when they get to the Big Ten?
I think Oregon's very real because they're recruiting well. Washington, I do think Washington is a little more reliant on like absolutely nailing it at quarterback. So it's hard. Like I don't know what they're going to do after Michael Penix leaves. So I have a little more questions about Washington long term than I do Oregon. But I think both are coming to the Big Ten next year at worst as like top 6 teams in the league, right? Top 5 teams in the league. Like the big 3 that exist already, and then these two come in. And if you want to tell me that Washington and Oregon are better positioned than Penn State, I might listen to you.
I think that Michael Pratt, the Tulane quarterback, has to be in the Big Ten next year.
Michael Pratt and maybe Riley Leonard, the Duke quarterback, if he doesn't go to the NFL.
And Will Howard, the Kansas State quarterback. I mean, like, there's just like, if you tell me like Michael Pratt's Washington's quarterback next year, right? I think like Jonathan Smith at Michigan State, maybe Ohio State. Like, I think there are many options for some dudes, and like that's how this happened, right? Like northern teams, like you have to be willing and able to do this when guys become available, and it's just barely started. Pratt's not officially in the portal yet, but I think a lot of people have speculated that he's a 4-year starter at Tulane, that he might do a 1-year leap like that, like Sam Hartman did from Wake Forest to Notre Dame. So, yeah, I think these teams will find a way to keep it going. I don't disagree with you, but I also think like Washington probably will find an instant answer. Because you want to go play on that offense,
right? Yeah, it's not a hard sell to get a quarterback, I don't think. Yeah.